Hey guys, Pete here. Alright, this will be my recap and review for Twin Peaks Season 3, Part 6. I apologize up front for my voice. I am still nursing this cold. And this is your spoiler warning. If you haven't seen Part 6 yet, you will want to stop watching this video now. Just a quick reminder, if you want to skip over the scene-by-scene breakdown, you can go to the description and there will be a timestamp link that will take you to the end discussion. So we start off about half an hour later than the end of Part 5, and we know this because the security guard, or the cop, comes back to Dougie Coop, who hasn't left the site of the statue. Eventually he gets Dougie Coop home, and as Janey-E is getting him into the door, the cop guy hands her a manila envelope someone has left outside on their stoop. The most interesting thing here is that the officer says he seems a little disoriented, and Naomi Watts says that's on a good day. Remember, this is still the first full day of Agent Cooper living inside Dougie's life, so although we'll probably never know what the original Dougie was like, it helps to understand why he's lasted as long as he has in this state. Like, obviously, there were, strange episodes going on in Dougie world. Janey-E brings up Dougie's car, which we'll get into in a bit, but overall just seems concerned about how Dougie Coop is doing. Next, they have a sandwich together, and she says she's going to take him to see Dr. Ben at lunchtime tomorrow. This makes it sound like he's visited this doctor before. She sends Dougie Coop upstairs to say goodnight to Sonny Jim, and I know more and more people are growing tired of watching Coop like this, but I still love watching Kyle MacLachlan acting in these scenes. He does a great job of looking lost and clueless. Sonny Jim is in bed reading what looks like a Hardy Boys book. He directs Dougie Coop to sit on the bed next to him, and he won't take a chip from him when he offers since he says he's already brushed his teeth. He asks if he can leave his cowboy light on and if Dougie Coop will stay with him until he falls asleep. They have a little battle with the clapper on the cowboy light that I talked about in my top moments video, and eventually get interrupted. Janey-E downstairs decides to take a look inside that unmarked manila envelope, and this leads to that interruption. She yells to tell Dougie Coop to get downstairs, and this definitely disappoints Sonny Jim. Janey-E presents Dougie Coop with the photo of him and Jade, and he brightens up and he says, "Jade," smiles, and then before he says, "Jade gave 2 rides." Picture is of the real Dougie, and they're wearing different clothes than what we saw whenever we met her the first time in the show. So this isn't from the day of the switch, but not sure if that's important. Like, he had an ongoing relationship with her. Janey is furious that A, he hasn't contacted the guys he owes money to, and B, that he's been sleeping with Jade. I love how Naomi Watts is fuming in this section, and you admit you know her. The phone rings and Janey-E takes charge of the situation. After reprimanding the guy on the phone, she sets a meet for 12:30 at the park, and she says she'll be the one with the red purse. She scolds Dougie Coop, tells him she can't take him to see the doctor now because she has to go meet his friends, and then reminds him that he better get his work done because they can't afford for him to lose his job. It's worth noting here that even though she is really pissed, she's still protective and gives him a kiss on the head before she walks off. The transition shot is a little bit out of place. It's the stoplight turning red like we've seen before, and we hear that electrical hum while it's on the screen before we cut away. From there we see Mike appear to Dougie Coop from the red room again. He tells him that he has to wake up. Wake up. Then he says, "Don't die," 3 times while making a motion with his arm. Not sure if this is supposed to be a spell or what it is, but he's definitely on Dougie's side. We see that. Dougie Coop then starts seeing little dots of light on his case files and begins going to work marking the documents. We see him following cues and making marks that look like lines, scribbles, ladders, and stairs. There's some music playing in the background here as he works, and I mention this because I brought it up in my 10 Things You Might Have Missed video from the last episode, that it might be an indication, since there was no music at first when he came back, maybe this is an indication of when we're seeing signs of his return to his old self. Granted, he's still completely in La La Land, but he is working, so that's something improvement. I just get happy when Albert is on the screen anytime, and I perked up right away when I realized he was driving in a car talking to Gordon. Cole reminds Albert that the work he's doing is very, very important, 2 varies, and that he'll be thinking of him as he's drinking this fine Bordeaux. Albert responds that he loves a night on the town when it's 34 degrees outside and raining. When he gets out of the car, he delivers what may be his best line of all time as he raises his umbrella. He growls, "Fuck Gene Kelly, you motherfucker," and then keeps on walking. He enters Max Vaughn's bar, which looks like it is probably in an eastern U.S. city like Philadelphia or somewhere nearby. But really, it could be anywhere that the temperature drops to close to freezing. There's nothing clear, it just reminded me of something eastern. Get a great suspenseful shot as he approaches, and I had a pretty good idea of what was coming, considering this doesn't look like a Sarah Palmer type of place. Sure enough, we see a woman with a platinum blonde wig from behind, and he says her name, Diane. The way it was set up, it was just like, come on, say it, come on, just say it, Albert, say it. Anyway, she turns around with a cigarette in hand. We see that it's Laura Dern and that she is the woman who Agent Cooper was always talking to through the tape recorder. Through distant and sad-looking eyes, she simply says, "Hello, Albert," and then we cut away. The transition scene here is what looks like a logging operation. We get a panning shot that includes a Corvette, henchmen with automatic weapons, a new character, Red, and the sounds of someone making strange, excited noises in the background. We find out that Richard Horne is making the noises as a result of trying out a sample of a new batch of drugs. I discussed Red in the Top Moments video, so I'll just reiterate that he's an intriguing character. He calls the drug Sparkle, and he seems to be on it himself. He also seems to like to throw around his weight in the conversation by calling Richard small time and kid. Red's basically testing Richard by the things he says, and he also provides some nice comedic moments in his whacked out state. I laughed when he got a little too excited, then had to explain that he had a problem with his liver. Anyways, they go back and forth. Red asks him if he's got this under control, threatens that he will be watching him, and that he'll saw his head open and eat his brains if he F's him over. He then does his coin flip magic trick to drive the sentiment home. It's a pretty cool trick, and it seems to really piss Richard off. Richard takes his pissed offedness on the road with him and basically stews his way along down the road. From there we visit the Fat Trout trailer park, which is located in a different place from when we saw it in Deer Meadow and Fire Walk with Me. I've mentioned this before, I don't know exactly what the story is as far as how it got there, but it's definitely in a different place. We see Carl Rod getting into a van with another new character named Mickey. He's running up and he wants to see if Carl will give him a ride into town because he has to pick up Linda's mail at the post office. Linda is, of course, one of the names the Giant mentions in the beginning of part 1, so I imagine everyone in the fandom's ears sort of perked up when we heard this. They talk on the ride and we find out that Carl goes into town just about every day, that Linda was likely wounded in the war, she has gotten an electric wheelchair, and that Carl has been smoking for 75 years. Now that seemed like a really long time to me, and I looked it up, and Harry Dean Stanton is actually 90 years old. So if Carl's the same age as him, then that's definitely possible. We cut to the Double R where Heidi is giggling while a customer is talking. We see Shelley there behind the counter at the same time, and she's listening in. We get a little bit of background here. The customer's name is Miriam. She works at a school, loves Double R cherry pie, and leaves a tip that Shelley and Heidi think is beyond her means. This makes us wonder if this is who Red mentions to Richard in drug deal scene. Next we see Carl sitting on a bench enjoying a smoke and a cup of Double R coffee. Mickey's no longer with him. While he's sitting there looking at the trees, we see his face sort of change to something like uneasiness, I would say. And then we see a mom and her boy come by. They're playing a game where the boy runs for a bit and stops, and then the mom comes and runs after and grabs a hold of him. This puts a smile back on Carl's face, but it's a little bit ominous at the same time. We get some shots going back and forth to Richard Horne driving down the road, being zooted and also still fuming about how Red talked to him. Then we get a full-on scene with him where he comes up to an intersection, which I've read is the same one that, in Fire Walk with Me, where Mike pulled up to Leland and Laura and was shouting into the car. Seeing that there's cars there stopped at the sign, he says F this and decides to go around rather than stopping. At the same time, we see the mom and son come to the crosswalk. The driver, first in line at the stop, sees them and waves them on, and then in a brutal shot, we see Richard run him down. Several people at the intersection witness this, and Horne just keeps driving, shouting out, "Hey, I told you to get out of the way." And we also see Miriam spot Richard driving away, and the two of them actually make eye contact. Back at the scene, we see the mother breaking down with her child in her arms while a small crowd gathers. Having heard the screams, Carl walks towards the intersection for what strikes me as a very important sequence. As he looks on, he sees a yellow light leave the boy's body, traveling upwards until it disappears. He then walks over in what looks like an effort to comfort her. We then get a shot of the telephone pole with the same markings as the one from the Fat Trout in Fire Walk with Me. But I'm not going to get into all that. But this is a telephone pole similar to one we've seen before. It's not in the same place, but it does have the same number 6 plate on the front of it and a smaller plate with the number 324810. And when the camera pans up to the power lines, we have that electrical hum, or that's what I'm going to call it anyway. It's not quite a hum. It's something like a crackle or whatever, but it's called a hum that we associate with the lodges. While the sound plays, the screen fades to black. So no room above a convenience store here, but interesting that they're calling back to that kind of imagery. We visit Mr. Todd in his office where he's working on his computer. As he's answering emails or something, we see a red square appear on his screen. We aren't sure where it came from, but he seems to know what it means, and he goes directly to his safe, pulling out an envelope while he's using a tissue so that he doesn't leave any prints on it. It's a plain envelope, but it has a strange black dot or mark on it. Back at Rancho Rosa, the police have they've responded to the scene where Dougie's car blew up. We see them collecting evidence, and that the front end of, the front bumper with the Dougie LV plate on it has ended up on the drugged out mother's roof. We see her inside shouting 119, and I noticed it was similar to the last time we saw her do that because there was a pill in the bottle. So I went back and checked, and it's exactly the same footage from part 3. If you put both clips side by side, it's clear that it's the same shot, but I don't know what that means. But yeah, they just reused that same footage. Now, if that's a clue or not, that's up for discussion. Next, we meet another new character at a motel in what looks like the Las Vegas area. He's a dwarf who appears to be rolling a pair of dice and recording the outcomes in a notebook. As he's doing this, we see the envelope from Mr. Todd's desk get slipped underneath his door. He pulls out the contents, and we see that it's a picture of Lorraine and the real Dougie. And Ike the Spike, which we learn is his name from the credits, grabs an ice pick off his desk and studies the pictures before stabbing them both in their faces. Dougie Coop has made it back to his office with his old black suit on, his case files, and his very own coffee for the day. He still hasn't figured out the elevator, but eventually gets going in the right direction. His boss calls him into his office to look at the case files, and we see outside Tom Sizemore's character Tony is watching from his own office. At first, Bud or Bushnell thinks Dougie Coop needs professional help after looking at the drawings, but he looks again and makes sense of what Dougie scratched down there. We hear some music creep into the background as he starts to figure it out, but don't get any real indication ourselves of what he's discovered. He says it's disturbing, so we assume some sort of fraud or misconduct is probably going on from Tony or something like that. I mean, obviously, Coop called him a liar, and that is probably true. Janey-E is at the park with her red purse. This is a great scene where Naomi Watts lays out her terms and ends up paying them $25,000 instead of the $52,000 that they were asking for the juice, and then gives them a proper talking to that was just absolutely awesome. She says, "We're living in a dark, dark age, and you are part of the problem. Now I suggest you take a good look at yourselves because I never want to see either of you again." And then she does this awesome shuffle as she goes back to the car, and we hear one of the guys say, "Tough dame." Ike the Spike shows up at Lorraine's office and goes on a gory tear. He corners Lorraine, stabbing her repeatedly while twisting the ice pick in her chest until she expires. He notices that another woman has come to the door and saw what he'd done, so he chases after her and puts her down off camera. We see him covered in blood walking away, looking pretty much unfazed about what he's just done, but then he gets instantly upset when he realizes he's bent the ice pick. Richard Horne pulls up off the road somewhere on the outskirts of town, I guess. There's a point here where we see the reflection of a telephone pole, that's the lines, in his windshield and hear that electrical hum before he stops the truck and sort of does a half-assed washing of the blood that's on his grill. When he's outside the car, the electrical lines and pole aren't in the frame, which doesn't mean they're not there, but it might be of interest because they're definitely noticeable in the reflection, but then we don't really see much going on when he gets out. Next, we get another big payoff, this time via Hawk. The mystery of the log lady, where she said that something was missing and it had something to do with his heritage, all comes together as he's in the bathroom at the sheriff's department. He drops a coin. It's a buffalo head or Indian head nickel. That makes him look around. He sees a Nez Perce Manufacturing label on the door, which is the tribe that he's from. It's also related to his heritage. He looks up and he finds missing screws. Starts tearing apart the door, only briefly slowed down by Chad being a douche. And he finds what looks to me to be pages out of Laura's secret diary. Now, I said in my Big Moments video that this might be where Mike had been in the bathroom. I went back and looked at that scene, and there's really nothing conclusive. If anything, it kind of disproves the theory. The bathroom doesn't look the same, and the way the scene's cut, it's like he goes in and comes right out, and nothing else happens. I'll talk a little bit more about these pages and what they might mean after the review. Next, we see Doris come in, and Frank comforts her and gets her out of the control room. After she leaves, Chad resumes being super douchey, and the woman at the switchboard says that they had a child who committed suicide, Frank and Doris, which obviously could be important about things, but it's important here because Doris used to be kind of normal, and now she acts like she does after this happened. What Chad says here could be important. He says that the Truman kid killed himself because he couldn't take being a soldier. So there may be a connection here with Linda and Frank Truman's son, but I don't know. After that, the episode ends back in the way we were used to with a musical performance at the Roadhouse. So this was quite a good episode. I mentioned that in my other video. If you skipped the scene by scene, welcome to the video. A lot of big stuff here. Obviously, there was a lot of us who thought that Albert and Cole were talking about Diane, so that's a great payoff to see that happen. A little disappointing that we didn't get to learn anything more about her, but, she's on board now, so let's see where that takes us. Also, the Hawk discovery, that's been a lingering question, and there really weren't very many good theories about it, in my opinion. I mean, I didn't have any, so I can't say, but yeah, there was a lot of kind of goofy things bouncing around, and it's good to see that it was pretty simple. I do think that those are pages from Laura's diary because that's something that's a part of the show that everyone sort of knows about. If you're confused about why or what, think back to when she originally takes the diary away. She did that in Firewalk with Me because she realized someone was tearing pages out. When we saw that, the assumption is that Bob was doing that through Leland, and that he was probably, he was taking the pages, but we thought maybe he was doing that because there was stuff about him written in it. Now, that still could be the case. It doesn't make sense in this narrative, but it could be that he was pulling out stuff that was coming from her dreams, like Annie's message, and possibly other things that we don't even know about yet. So the Mike thing doesn't look like it was probably him that put it there, but it could be explained in a number of ways that would make sense. Don't forget, Leland was at the police station several times, so they could have hid it to make sure that he wasn't found on his body, so on and so forth. Either way, I think those are Laura's pages, but it could be something else, and if you have an alternate theory, just let me know in the comments. I also think it's interesting that we finally made it to Fat Trout. That was something I had been waiting for. And really, mostly, I loved the Fat Trout Deer Meadow thing because it was just a good part of Firewalk with Me. But also, after learning more about Carl Rodd and the secret history, this place really seemed interesting. And I don't want to get into it too deeply because it might spoil the book for some people or whatever, but the fact that he sees this is a strong indication that when Cooper does, I guess if he does, regain his old self or whatever you want to call it, goes back to his old self, he may be improved over what we knew of him before. You know what I mean? Like, Carl Rodd was a child when he went away, and he came back, and he can obviously see things. The log lady can have messages that, we saw one pan out in this episode, right? So that's real stuff that's happening, I mean, she's not crazy. It's related to the fact that she went away whenever she was a child or was abducted, however you want to look at it. So we had Philip Jeffries out there on the fringes of things. He's been there and back, we assume, and Cooper as well. So, that's a whole nother kind of dimension to this whole lodge mythology, I guess you would say. Yeah, Naomi Watts really did a great job, and I think it's pretty interesting towards the whole Dougie storyline how protective she is of him, and that he, she's his real wife, you know what I mean? Like, that came up for a while that might not be, because we couldn't really figure out how Evil Coop had manufactured Dougie and just slipped him into a life. Because the original Dougie that we've seen he's played by Kyle MacLachlan, so he looks like the other two Coops, right? So, yeah, I think, if anything, we found out that she is on his side. He has had problems in the past that make it seem like he's just having a relapse or some sort, and that she is really protective and can actually help him out moving forward. Red is an interesting character. I'm not sure if he's anything but a zooted out crazy person, but there may be some other stuff going on. Obviously, whenever Richard is on his drug, he basically commits murder in a hit and run fashion, and we hear sound cues that make us think about the lodges and things like that, so not exactly sure where that's headed, but Richard Horne we know is important because of the giant. We've heard about Linda now. I'm hoping we'll see who she is really soon. So those two are taking us somewhere. We can see that Richard's path is definitely one of destruction. Perhaps Linda will be, the other side of the coin there. Ike the Spike was just crazy. Didn't see that character coming. The death scene was brutal. I mean, it's just over the top gore. And there was a weird juxtaposition there, the character was funny in the way he was presented, but equally, if not more so, just viciously brutal. So it's an interesting thing. I don't think that Dougie Coop would be a very good match for him at this point, and he's definitely on his way to find him in the near future. So that's something that's going to probably come to a head. The red box that set that whole thing in motion is a mystery. I might get into that and some other stuff that I've been looking at. I mean, and we're supposed to think that Evil Coop sent that, but we know Evil Coop is locked up. So is somebody else sending the red square, the person that he talked to on his briefcase before, or whoever he was communicating to on the phone? Obviously, Philip Jeffries comes to mind, but I wouldn't say that there's any clear evidence that Philip Jeffries is still around, other than Evil Coop talked to someone who may or may not have been Jeffries on the phone. So yeah, a lot to think about, a lot going on here. I guess you could say that we are through the first third, or maybe the first act. I don't know if it's broken up that neatly or whatever, but it's good to see Dougie Coop making some progress. I think that the light at the end of the tunnel is there for that. I think there's probably something going on with Sonny Jim, but it's still a little bit unclear. And I think his wife just sort of solidified the fact that she's on his side. Now, we haven't heard anything about the other stuff in South Dakota lately, so maybe we'll see a trip back to that. And also, I'm hoping that we're going to get more about the Garmon Bozia and the box investigation in New York. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know any questions, comments you have. I'll do a Q&A later this week. Hopefully by then I won't be sick anymore. Thanks for all your wishes and stuff in the comments of the last video. I think I might do that again. I like that. It's a little bit easier to do and gives me time to watch it once and then go ahead and break it down on the next one. So please like this video and please subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.